moving forward for this league and where you hope it continues to grow to?
Well, obviously, like, people respect people with zeros at the end of their checks. Like, let's just be honest. Like, there's respect element of things when you walk into a room if you have zeros behind your check. And so I feel like in order for the WNBA to be reputable and to be respected, you have to have zeros behind your check. And with that being said, a number of zeros behind your check. And that has crossed WNBA off the list for a number of years.
That brief pause right there says everything. It's the sound of someone realizing they've just stepped into one of the most sensitive and divisive conversations in women's basketball today. Because what Candace Parker says next isn't just another opinion. It's a statement that immediately split the WNBA community. Some people nodded in agreement. Others pushed back hard. And the timing of it all made the reaction even more intense. This interview dropped on all the smoke at a very specific moment, right as CBA negotiations between the league and the players were reaching a critical stage. Tensions are already high. Stakes are massive. Careers, salaries, and even the future structure of the league are on the line. So when a legendary player like Candace Parker speaks during this moment, every word carries extra weight. That's why this clip spread so quickly. It wasn't just about what she said, it was about when she said it. Whether intentional or not, her comments landed like gasoline on an already burning fire. Fans, players, and analysts immediately began dissecting her words, trying to determine whether she was advocating for progress or unintentionally reinforcing narratives that hurt the league's position. Candace Parker isn't just any former player. She's one of the most accomplished athletes in the history of women's basketball. Her voice carries authority. Her experience commands respect. So when she frames respect, pay, and legitimacy in a certain way, people listen, even if they don't agree. But that's exactly where the controversy begins. There's a difference between what sounds good emotionally and what actually aligns with historical evidence and financial reality. And that gap is what makes this interview so important to analyze carefully. The question isn't whether Candace Parker cares about the league. She clearly does. The question is whether the argument she's making truly reflects how respect, money, and growth actually work in professional sports. To understand that, we have to separate the emotional appeal of her words from the practical implications behind them. So let's slow this down and break it apart. Not what people felt when they heard it, but what was actually said, what it implies, and whether the league can realistically afford to follow that logic.
Well, obviously, like, people respect people with zeros at the end of their checks. Like, let's just be honest. Like, there's respect element of things when you walk into a room if you have zeros behind your check. And so I feel like in order for the WNBA to be reputable and to be respected, you have to have zeros behind your check. And with that being said, a number of zeros behind your check. And that has crossed WNBA off the list for a number of years.
To move this conversation forward, we have to step away from emotion and look at real numbers. Because facts matter, especially during collective bargaining. The WNBA is currently in its 30th season. So let's look at a fair comparison. The NBA during its 30th year of operation. In 1975, the average NBA salary was around $50,000. Adjusted for inflation, that equals roughly $270,000 in today's money. Now compare that to what's being proposed for the WNBA. Under the new proposal, the average WNBA salary would rise to approximately $500,000, nearly double what NBA players earned at the same stage of league development. The maximum salary would exceed $1 million compared to last season's max of around $224,000. Even more striking, the proposed minimum salary would be roughly equal to what last year's maximum salary was. These are not minor adjustments. This represents a massive financial restructuring of the league. And that's the part that often gets ignored in public debate. People talk as if the league is refusing to evolve, when in reality, the proposed changes already exceed historical benchmarks set by far more established leagues. Growth has to be sustainable. The NBA didn't jump straight to massive salaries. It scaled alongside revenue, media deals, and global interest. Skipping steps in that process isn't bold, it's risky. If the WNBA pushes too far ahead of its actual revenue base, it risks destabilizing the entire system it's trying to improve.
And what Candace is saying from a societal standpoint, like, unfortunately, if you have more money, sometimes people are more likely to respect you or are kinder to you. However, when it comes to the WNBA, I don't think adding more zeros at the end of their check is going to make people respect them. Like, the respect is going to be earned from the product that is on the court. And I also don't think that that's the greatest argument when it comes to the CBA negotiations. Like, imagine going to your boss and being like, I need to be paid more, because if I'm paid more and people know that I'm getting paid more, then they're going to respect me. Do you guys know what I'm saying? Like, I don't think that that's the best argument to make. I think the thought process should be, we should be getting paid more. The players should be getting paid more because the product on the court is exceptional, because the viewership is up, because attendance is up. Like, those are the things that...
Respect equals zeros on a paycheck. That's the core of Candace Parker's opening argument, and it immediately raises serious questions. Her claim is straightforward. If WNBA players were making millions of dollars, the jokes would stop, the disrespect would disappear, and the league would finally be taken seriously on a mainstream level. On the surface, that sounds compelling. Money often signals legitimacy. Higher salaries can shift public perception. But the problem is that we already have real-world evidence that directly challenges this theory, and it doesn't support her conclusion. Take Diana Taurasi as a perfect example. At the height of her prime, she skipped an entire WNBA season to play overseas in Russia, earning around $1 million. That's exactly the kind of financial scenario Candace is describing. Elite talent, elite pay. And yet what happened to the league? Nothing. The WNBA didn't collapse. Viewership didn't spike or crash. Media coverage didn't dramatically change. The league simply kept moving forward as it always had. Even with its biggest star playing elsewhere for more money, the perception of the WNBA remained largely the same. That reality exposes a flaw in the argument that higher individual salaries automatically lead to respect. Respect doesn't come just from paying one or two players more. It comes from sustained audience interest, media engagement, and cultural relevance. If money alone solved the respect problem, that moment should have changed everything. But it didn't, because respect in sports is driven primarily by demand, not compensation. This isn't about minimizing what players deserve. It's about recognizing that paychecks are a result of value creation, not a shortcut to it. Fans don't suddenly tune in because salaries rise. Networks don't increase coverage just because contracts get bigger. Candace's argument assumes a cause and effect relationship that history doesn't support. And when you're negotiating a new CBA, building strategy on assumptions instead of evidence is dangerous. The league can't afford to pretend that writing bigger checks magically fixes perception issues. That's not how sports ecosystems work, and the WNBA's own history proves it.
I've never heard of a league where the coach is paid more than the best player. I have never, and please correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't know.
The best player on the team is going to make more than the head coach.
Yes.
So with all of these owners that are saying, or the WNBA in general that's saying we can't play players that, then how are you finding this for coaches is what would be my first question in the CBA negotiations. But
all right, there's a couple things to break down here. Let's first talk about the salaries and her saying that the women just need to wait. So I actually looked up what the average salary was in 1975, which was the 30th season in the NBA. So as you guys know, the NBA is like in its 80-something season. The WNBA will be going into their 30th season, seeing as if the 30th season happens and they figure out the CBA. So in 1975 in the NBA, the estimated average player salary was around $50,000. This figure would be roughly $270,000 in today's money when adjusted for inflation.
Candace Parker then ties salary expectations to endorsement power, and this is where the argument becomes even more unstable. She points to social media followings, mentioning players like Paige Bueckers having more followers than certain male athletes, implying that this popularity should translate directly into higher pay. But here's the problem. Social media followers are not the same thing as viewership. And in professional sports, viewership is the metric that actually matters. Take a clear comparison. Angel Reese has more social media followers than Caitlin Clark, by a wide margin. Yet when you look at television ratings, ticket sales, and arena attendance, the Indiana Fever with Caitlin Clark outperformed the Chicago Sky across almost every measurable category. That difference matters because brands don't pay for likes. They pay for eyes. They care about how many people watch games, buy tickets, and stay engaged over time. Social media numbers can help build a brand, but they don't guarantee that fans will show up consistently. This distinction is critical. 1 million Instagram followers doesn't mean 1 million people are tuning in to watch live games. It doesn't mean advertisers are getting return on investment. It doesn't mean networks can justify higher broadcast deals. That's why tying salary demands directly to social media presence is risky. It confuses visibility with consumption. And while those two can overlap, they are not interchangeable. The Caitlin Clark example makes this clear. Her impact shows up in ratings, attendance, merchandise sales, and national broadcasts, not just online engagement. That's why brands prioritize her. That's why networks feature her. That's why the Indiana Fever dominate attention. This doesn't mean other players aren't valuable. It means value has to be measured by how it moves the business forward. Social media is part of the equation, but it's not the foundation. If a league bases salary structures on follower counts instead of actual revenue drivers, it risks building an economic model that doesn't hold up under scrutiny.
in the CBA negotiations. But
all right, there's a couple things to break down here. Let's first talk about the salaries and her saying that the women just need to wait. So I actually looked up what the average salary was in 1975, which was the 30th season in the NBA. So as you guys know, the NBA is like in its 80 something season. The WNBA will be going into their 30th season, seeing as if the 30th season happens and they figure out the CBA. So in 1975 in the NBA, the estimated average player salary was around $50,000. This figure would be roughly $270,000 in today's money when adjusted for it.
Finally, let's address Candace Parker's comparison between player salaries and coaching salaries, because this argument lacks crucial context. Yes, some WNBA coaches earn over $1 million. Names like Becky Hammon and Nate Tibbetts come up often, but these coaches didn't rise through the WNBA system alone. They were developed in the NBA. Becky Hammon worked directly under Greg Popovich, widely considered one of the greatest coaches in basketball history. Nate Tibbetts served as an assistant coach across multiple NBA franchises. These are elite credentials. To pull that level of coaching talent away from the premier basketball league in the world, you have to offer premier compensation. And those investments weren't mistakes. They paid off immediately. Hammond won a championship. Tibbetts led his team to the finals. These weren't vanity hires. They were strategic business decisions. Comparing those salaries directly to player pay without acknowledging the competitive coaching market creates a misleading narrative. Coaches are being paid not just for what they do in the WNBA, but for what they could do elsewhere if they weren't there. The league made calculated investments to raise the quality of play, professionalism, and credibility. And in this case, those investments worked. That doesn't mean players don't deserve more. It means compensation has to reflect market dynamics, not just internal comparisons. If the WNBA wants to grow, it has to balance ambition with realism. Paying for elite coaching raised the league's level, but paying beyond revenue capacity could undo that progress. That's the tension Candace Parker's argument overlooks, and it's why this conversation is far more complicated than sound bites suggest.